there's a process of rebirth. What is this enlightenment for Freire? The enlightenment comes about when an oppressor, a former oppressor, converts by trusting those who he or she formerly oppressed to see the system of their own oppression, really the architecture of that he created to impose oppression on others. He recognizes it, the oppressor recognizes it, and he can have camaraderie with the oppressed, but he cannot then lead the transformation. Now it's time for the oppressed to lead this transformation, and the oppressed have to have a sense of their own recognition, independent to the recognition that the oppressor has had. Okay. Next point, last point in this section, camaraderie offers converts glimpses into the structure of their domination, and that's what I just said, right? This idea of camaraderie offers them a glimpse into the structure that has been used to dominate and oppress and objectify members of the oppressed group. Okay. The last point in this discussion is the role of fatalism. Right. Last point in this discussion is the role of fatalism. Fatalism in this context for Freire is often interpreted as docility, right? Often interpreted as docility. Docility is, it's like the yes man. Oh, I'm so happy to see you. Is everything? Oh, sure, everything's good. In African American community, this would be the Sambo. Right? The Sambo is always smiling, always go lucky, Mr. Happy. The Sambo is always there to please, right? So this idea of fatalism, right, is an idea that originates within the confines of the oppressed group, right? So you have an oppressed group, and the confines, the structure, this framework that binds them, that oppresses them, is this idea of docility. D-O-C-I-L-I-T. Docility or fatalism. Right? Fatalism, docility binds the oppressed group, right? It's the pressure that they feel to conform to those who are oppressed, right? To make the oppressors feel unaffected, right? I don't want someone to feel threatened by my presence, right? So what I end up doing is I become docile. Obviously, the reactionary account is I don't care if you feel comfortable or not. Is really what it is, right? Docility becomes this, oh, sir, am I too loud? Oh, sir, it's that, right? And Freire is specifically saying that it is this level of docility that further objectifies, further alienates an already objectified, alienated group of people. The next point is that docility surfaces as a consequence of historical and social oppression. It is not an inherent characteristic. That's obvious, right? The whole idea of, for example, in African American history, the Sambo, the whole idea of the Sambo is not that people are inherently prone to this sort of docility, right? People aren't inherently prone to their domination and their subordination. People want to be free. But people recognize also that because of historical situations, I find myself in a position where I am powerless, and the only way that I can preserve my livelihood is by pacifying the master, pacifying those in control, pacifying those who have power at my own expense, right? So you become the Sambo, you do the minstrel show. The reason why you do that is because you want to preserve your own livelihood. And what Freire says is it's the acceptance of this docility that creates the framework of binding, of further objectifying, of further oppressing members of the oppressed group. Next point is that the attempt to interpret their oppression, and this is the oppressed attempt to interpret their suffering, their oppression, as the will of God, right? God is trying to teach me a lesson, and that's why I'm oppressed. I'm just not learning my lesson, right? God will show me a way out of this, right? And this is not to knock religion. If you have religious belief, then that's fine. The point is, though, is that often within oppressed communities, those who are oppressed look at their suffering, look at their oppression as the will of God. God wants me to suffer because I've done something wrong. My people are suffering because we've done something wrong and I haven't learned a lesson, right? So if the nature of their oppression is a supernatural account, then really and truly there's nothing that human beings can do to free themselves of this oppression, because it's God that's making me suffer. God's causing me to suffer. How can I influence God to bring about my liberation? I can't. So what do? I'm never going to revolt. I'm never going to fight. I'm never going to argue, because I'm waiting, in a sense, for God to free my people. Rather than recognizing, and I'm not, there might be varying interpretations of Freire at this point. Rather than recognizing, I would say that the liberation, the emancipation of a people come from the people themselves, right? So you have to be careful, right? And again, I'm not trying to say that, this is not me actually, this is Freire, but there is an attempt to interpret the oppression of a class of people, the oppressed, as the will of God. The complication arises that if it is God who is in fact oppressing these people, right? If it is His will that is causing the oppression of these people, then there's no way to bring about the liberation of these people, because we'd have to wait for God to do it, right? And I'll let you draw your own conclusions from that statement. The next point is that the oppressed express docility towards the oppressor, but they express what's known as horizontal violence toward members of their own class, right? So